you must reject Ed. Worship a maximally great and perfect being instead. Hi, I'm Dr. Tim Stratton with FreeThinking Ministries. In response to the Deity of Deception Argument that J.P. Moreland and I have advanced in our journal article entitled An Explanation and Defense of the FreeThinking Argument, several have attempted to defeat the second premise. In our paper, this key premise reads as follows. If God determines all Christians to affirm some false theological beliefs, then God is deceptive, and His Word, the Bible, cannot be trusted. Elsewhere, I've worded it in the following manner. If God determines all Christians to have some false theological intuitions and to hold some false theological beliefs, then God is an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs. Now, a common response is for the committed determinist to propose a counterexample. If successful, this would provide a defeater to the key premise of the Deity of Deception argument. Now, if this premise is defeated, then any conclusions do not follow. Hence, the argument would be debunked. Well, what are these counterexamples? Well, thus far, they are typically some kind of deterministic machine or mechanism or system that is generally reliable, but occasionally fails. Now, none of these things are agents, but things utilized by agents. So, for example, suppose you've worn the same watch for the past decade. And over the past 10 years, it's only failed to provide the correct time on less than a handful of occasions. But it's usually right on the money. Now, in this sense, your watch, although not infallible, is generally reliable. The mere fact that it failed to provide the correct time on a couple of occasions does not mean that it's not a trustworthy watch. Indeed, it's a generally reliable timekeeper. But this response misses the point. I contend that we must compare apples to apples and that these proposed counterexamples are not relevantly analogous to what the Deity of Deception argument is advancing. Richard Bryant Davis writes, "The reason we don't blame clocks for their evil doing is that we recognize that they cannot avoid doing what they do. Given the arrangement of their parts and the laws governing their mechanical interactions, they operate out of sheer necessity. They don't have the power of doing good or evil because they don't have the power to decide to do otherwise." That's in the book Explaining Evil on page 15. Now, intentional agents, on the other hand, who can choose to deceive or not to deceive, are in a different category entirely. For example, I often reference Alvin Plantinga, who once noted the circularity involved by referencing Thomas Reid's perceptive statement. He said, "If you want to know whether or not a man tells the truth, the right way to proceed is not to ask him." Well, the suspected liar might be honest most of the time, but if you have reason to suspect a certain man is a generally reliable liar, why should you believe this individual when he tells you that he is not a liar, at least right now? I love this humorous example supporting my case in the recent Disney Plus series. Loki says, "You can trust me," and Mobius says, "Loki, I've studied almost every moment of your entire life. You literally stabbed people in the back like 50 times. And Loki responds, "Well, I'll never do it again." Well, perhaps Loki has had thousands of exchanges with others in which he did not stab them in the back. But the mere fact that he has literally stabbed people in the back like 50 times is enough to justify a reason to doubt that Loki is telling Mobius the truth in their current conversation. Similarly, if an attorney can show that a key witness, who let's say has made 100 statements under oath, has lied even once on the stand, then he's immediately disqualified as reliable or trustworthy. The attorney might not be able to demonstrate his other 99 statements are false, but there is reason to disregard his entire set of statements. His other 99 statements might be true, but they are not justified because of this glaring defeater. Now, with this in mind, consider the following courtroom drama. Cato, the prosecution's star witness, takes the stand. He places his hand on the Bible and takes an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and ends it with, "So help me God." Now, Cato, after being questioned by the prosecution and cross-examined by the defense attorney, offers 100 statements sufficient to convict the defendant, which will lead to the death penalty. After Cato completes his 100 statements, the following dialogue takes place. The judge says, "Thank you for sharing these 100 statements with the court, Cato. Thank you for your testimony. You're excused." And Cato says, "Your Honor, may I say one more thing before I step down?" The judge says, "I'm inclined to allow it. What is it, Cato?" Cato says, "I feel the need to make it clear, since I did take an oath of honesty, that at least one of the statements I offered today is false." The judge responds, "Well, which one was it?" And Cato said, "You tell me." The judge in response says, "Cato, I'm in no epistemic position to know which of your 99 statements are true if I do not know which of your 100 statements is false. This is literally a life and death issue. You must let the court know which one of your statements is false." Cato said, "I can't do that, but I will add this for the sake of clarity. I can promise that at least one of my 100 statements is false, but maybe, just maybe, up to 49 of my statements offered today are also false. But don't worry, I solemnly swear and promise the court that at least 51 of my 100 statements are true, and perhaps up to 99 of my statements may or may not be true. Thus, I am generally reliable, and my testimony is still sufficient to convict the defendant and execute him." The defense attorney pipes in, "Your Honor, since we are in no epistemic position to know which statements are true and which are false, I move to strike Cato's entire testimony from the record. He has perjured himself, and thus none of his statements are reliable or trustworthy." The prosecuting attorney jumps in. "Objection! Cato promised us, while under oath, that at least 51% of his statements were true. Thus, Cato is generally reliable, and we ought to convict the defendant and send him to his death." The judge speaks up. "Don't be ridiculous, prosecutor. Why should we believe that Cato is generally reliable at all? Indeed, if he's willing to intentionally deceive the court at least once, why should we believe him when he says he's generally reliable? For all we know, that's a lie too. If you ever say anything that stupid again in my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt of court. I hereby strike the entirety of Cato's testimony from the record and instruct the jury to disregard this testimony entirely. It is not to be considered as evidence in this case. Absolutely none of it, even what might be true, is reliable. We have reason to doubt all of it. Thus, the statements offered under oath by Cato are unjustified, since a huge defeater is present. Given the presence of this defeater, Cato's statements do not count as knowledge claims, and moreover, if we're going to sentence a man to death, it must be based upon what we know." The defense attorney jumps in and says, "Judge, the egregious conduct of this witness has unduly prejudiced my client. A simple instruction to the jury is inadequate to unring that bell in this instance. While the typical request may be for a mistrial, the record reflects that without Cato's testimony, the state has failed to meet its prima facie burden in this matter, and on that basis, the defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges with prejudice." The judge looks at the prosecution and says, unless you have trustworthy witnesses, I'm inclined to agree with the defense attorney and dismiss this entire case. The prosecutor said, "Well, the state has no further witnesses, Your Honor." And the judge provides closing remarks. Having considered the matter, I believe the defendant's motion to dismiss with prejudice is well taken and appropriate under the circumstances. All charges are hereby dismissed. The defendant is free to go. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we thank you for your service in this matter. You are now excused. Bailiff, please arrest Cato for perjuring himself in this court. He might be a generally reliable liar, but he cannot be trusted because he is an intentional deceiver. Court adjourned. The end, right? All right. So that's the end of my little story there, but it makes a point. Similarly, if we have reason to suspect that the manner in which we experience thought and reason is determined by a generally reliable deceptive deity or an untrustworthy source of theological beliefs, then why assume these specific thoughts and reasons, which are already suspected of being unreliable, are reliable when addressing this defeater? We need more. We need so much more than general reliability in this scenario. We need a God of truth who desires all people to come to a knowledge of the truth, which, by the way, is literally what the Bible says, right? We need that God who does not occasionally, if not often, determine all people, including each and every one of his own followers, to get important things wrong. We don't need that deity of deception. We need the God of truth, a maximally great being who is trustworthy. Andrei Bukharev is a compatibilist who recently hammered this point home on one of my favorite podcasts, The Free Will Show. Bukharev said, quote, "Now you get to somebody who's a dyed-in-the-wool Calvinist, let's say, and they're a theological compatibilist. I don't think compatibilism helps them one bit. Compatibilism is a theory of free agency. If you've got divine manipulation, appealing to compatibilism to help out is kind of icky. First, there's the ick factor. Is that view of a deity, a being worth worshiping? I don't think so. But then secondly, I just don't see it working. Compatibilism is supposed to be, as formulated in the late 20th century, early 21st century context, a thesis about impersonal causation and not the activity of another agent. That's where I don't see compatibilism helping out the theological determinist," end quote. Well, amen to that. I've been saying similar things for a long time. Now, in the courtroom drama I offered, the judge represents you, the person, evaluating the data and trying to figure out what or who is reliable and trustworthy, and what or who is not trustworthy. Now, Cato represents the God of determinism. Cato's 100 statements, his testimony, or his word, represents the Bible. The defense attorney represents me, Tim Stratton, making a case that a generally reliable liar ought not be trusted. Finally, the prosecutor represents divine determinists, typically Calvinists, who maintain that generally reliable liars should still be trusted. A proper counterexample needs to have a personal agent who intentionally uses his power to determine others to affirm false beliefs about a certain topic, and then show that one's beliefs about that certain topic are trustworthy while simultaneously being determined by the deceptive agent. With all that said, the following argument raised against the theological belief of exhaustive divine determinism, or what I refer to as ED, seems sound. 1. No belief is justified if it can be fully explained as the result of untrustworthy antecedent conditions. 2. If ED is true, then all theological beliefs can be fully explained as the result of untrustworthy antecedent conditions, a deity of deception. 3. Therefore, if ED is true, then no theological belief is justified. If this low view of God, entailed by exhaustive divine determinism, is true, then we cannot make sense of the teachings of Jesus found in John 8:32, when Jesus says, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." After all, like Cato in the courtroom drama, is this one of the claims of the deity of deception that we should believe is true, or not? How would we know? Now, whether it's true or false, we have reason to think that it's not true, since it was inspired by an agent who intentionally uses his power to determine all people, including his so-called elect and spirit-filled followers, to affirm false theological beliefs. So, if you affirm the theological belief that you can know the truth and that the truth shall set you free, and if you really do know that the words of Jesus, these theological beliefs, are in fact true, then you must reject the low view of God that is entailed by exhaustive divine determinism, or ED. You must reject ED. Worship a maximally great and perfect being instead. That's what I do. Here's the bottom line. Although compatibilists contend that some kind of freedom and or moral responsibility is compatible with determinism, we can conclude that epistemic reliability and justified theological beliefs are incompatible with exhaustive divine determinism. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and whatever you do, stay reasonable.